American Strategy Program at an institute around the world for today's program. The New America Foundation is a think tank full of what we call radical centrists. We try to take a pragmatic, solutions-oriented approach to public policy questions around a wide variety of issues. And I've had the pleasure of building with my colleagues the foreign policy and national security programs of the organization and working as well on our international economic activities. And the reason that both of these strains of work are important is that we're going to be dealing with both of those today in our forum called U.S.-Saudi Relations in a World Without Equilibrium, where we'll be taking a look at and discussing both the geoeconomic and the geostrategic consequences of the relationship on a whole wide variety of levels. And we have what I think is really a world-class program, and we've had a world-class partner in the Committee for International Trade of the Saudi Chambers of Commerce. I want to introduce Abdulaziz Al Fahad, who is the incoming new chairman of the Committee for International Trade. He is in partnership with Aiken Gump, Strauss, Hauer, and Feld out of Saudi Arabia, a lecturer on international law, and our partner, and I've invited him to say a few words. So please welcome Abdulaziz Al Fahad.
Thank you, and my biography is about 5 years old that you read. I am not a partner of Aiken Gump, although I like them. Let me start by thanking everybody for coming to our conference. I also would like to thank especially Steve and the New America Foundation for all the tremendous efforts they have done to ensure the success of this conference. Also, let me thank my colleagues at the CIT they have been working for months on this, and hopefully we see the results today. And all I can say is welcome, and let's have a good conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You know, the reason that we did this program, it was started, and I want to make one special mention. I violate protocol. There's so many people to thank today and to recognize folks that were former senators, former ambassadors. We'll get to most of them. There are a lot of Abdullahs here. Abdullah Ali Reza, I want to say the Minister of Commerce right now of the Saudi Arabia, is really one of the godfathers in the Committee on International Trade. And a couple of years ago, I challenged him and he challenged me. And I said, you know, this relationship sort of hides in the shadows. It's not something that is discussed, warts and all, strengths and weaknesses, where we're going in a more public way. And he says, well, if you'll help produce a forum that's fair, in fact, I think Prince Turki here said, Steve, I know you're going to be a fair taskmaster, and we will. And we're going to work through today through a lot of these important questions. But I want to personally thank my friend Abdullah Ali Reza, the Minister of Commerce, for actually coming through in a huge way for us. This relationship is one where, whether you're looking at Pakistan today, I understand there are a number of envoys in Saudi Arabia or on their way. Of course, Secretary of State Clinton is in the region. George Mitchell is in the region. There's a lot of stuff up right now, whether it is the AFPAC issues, the solvency of the Arab Peace Initiative, whether it's looking at what we just saw unfold in the last couple of days in the IMF. So this is very important, and I want to thank all of you for being here. We're going to have a number of moderators today. I have the pleasure of moderating the next session with our very distinguished panel, each of whom are going to speak here for a few minutes. And I've asked the vice chairman of the co-chairman of the U.S.-Saudi Arabian Business Council, so our chamber essentially in Saudi Arabia, Peter Robertson, who's the vice chairman of Chevron, to help say some remarks very quickly to help us out the context, and then we'll invite Senator Hagel to join us, and I'll say a few words about our next panel. Thank you, and please welcome Peter Robertson.
So this is where you get a few words from the sponsor. So good morning, and I'm Peter Robertson, and as we just described, I'm Vice Chairman of Chevron Corporation, but maybe more importantly, since I'm retiring from Chevron on Thursday, I'm co-chairman of the U.S.-Saudi Arabian Business Council. And in this first panel, we're asked to offer a forward projection of what the U.S.-Saudi relationship should look like and needs to achieve. And we're fortunate that this relationship can build on strong building blocks from the past. Ever since FDR and King Abdulaziz met on the SS Quincy in 1945, our two countries have been the closest of allies in promoting peace and security in the wider Middle East region and in promoting energy and economic security throughout the world. Indeed, the roots go back further to the earliest years of the modern Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, when the grandparent of Saudi Aramco of Saudi Aramco and Chevron, Standard Oil Company of California was the first to discover oil and ship oil from the kingdom. These are two major pillars, but the relationship we build today and in the future promises to be an even more all-embracing one to extend to economics, politics, security, and society on a global scale. And as the world's economy revives from the greatest recession since World War II, Saudi Arabia plays a crucial role in terms of energy investment, trade, and development. As the world confronts political and security challenges from Israel and Palestine to Afghanistan, Iran, and Pakistan, the kingdom again plays a critical role, as is evidenced by King Abdullah's path-breaking plan for regional peace. As more and less developed nations prepare their youth for the new challenges and opportunities of science and technology and development, the new economic cities and academic centers of the kingdom, from vocational training to advanced research, play a really dynamic role. Looking to the future, energy and environment will continue to be key issues for Saudi Arabia and the U.S. Ali Naimi, Saudi Arabia's longtime petroleum minister, had some excellent advice for some of us in Houston last month. Minister Naimi supports development of renewable energy with a vision that includes large-scale solar development and power generation not only for the kingdom, but for the region. But he reminds us that the world will continue to depend on oil and gas supply to meet most of its energy requirements for decades to come. And he warns that underinvestment there could lead to a major supply crunch and escalation in energy prices. His words are well worth pondering as our two countries pursue bilateral and global dialogues of this vital resource. And to quote Mr. Naimi, he said, in years to come, if traditional energy supplies should prove inadequate because capital expenditure was curtailed due to unsustainable prices, unreliable indications of future demand, or hopes for a substitute for oil that cannot deliver, such a supply crunch would be catastrophic. In this increasingly globalized era, in which all of these initiatives take place, Saudi Arabia and the United States have an unprecedented opportunity for leadership. And I would just like to add my 2 cents to the comment that was just made. You know, this relationship is one that just doesn't get talked about enough. You know, we see it all the time in our industry. Steve just mentioned it. I think many of the leaders of Saudi Arabia have started talking a lot more openly about this relationship. And I think on our side, we need to do the same thing, because this is a critical relationship that has, for some reason, and I guess reasons that maybe a lot of us can understand, has been sort of seemed to be talked about in the back room. We need to talk about this relationship in the front room with the public from here on out. So we're fortunate to have a fantastic panel of people to help us discuss this. And so let me turn back to Steve, who's going to introduce the panel and moderate.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We have a very cool panel. This is going to be exciting. It's an outstanding group of people. If we could assemble anyone in the world to have a discussion like this, we've got the right folks. I'm not going to say a lot about our hosts. Most don't need introduction, but I do want to thank former Senator Chuck Hagel, of course, who led so ably in the U.S. Senate for many years as a senator from Nebraska. We have and is now serving as the Distinguished Professor in the Practice of National Governance at Georgetown University, and of course, importantly, Chairman of the Atlantic Council of the United States. We have next to him Prince Turki Al Faisal. Prince Turki was ambassador of Saudi Arabia to the United States for a number of years, and also headed, as we learned last night, for 2 decades, the Saudi intelligence services, and he is the chairman of the King Faisal Center for Research in Islamic Studies in Riyadh. I've had the pleasure of visiting that center. I recommend that everyone do. It's a fascinating scholarly facility looking at culture and history in the Islamic world. We have Rita Hauser, who is chair of the Directors Council of the New America Foundation, a very well-known activist, philanthropist, a legal mind, just recently, I should call an immediate past board member of the RAND Corporation, one of the country's leading national security thinkers. She is chair of the International Peace Institute, of which Prince Turki is also a board member. And the man who really needs no introduction, but I'm so pleased and want to personally thank him. Last night we had the opportunity at a small dinner to have General Brent Scowcroft join us. Zbigniew Brzezinski National Security Advisor to Jimmy Carter, is really one of the world's most profound and I think important strategic thinkers. And I was among a group of people who helped convince these two gentlemen, Brent Scowcroft and Zbigniew Brzezinski, to write a sort of instruction manual and playbook, if you will, that if you were going to be the next president of the United States, how could you get things more right than wrong? What are the tough strategic choices? Not, hanging blame on the past, but this book that was called America and the World, Conversations on the Future of U.S. Foreign Policy, with Dr. Brzezinski, Brent Scowcroft, and David Ignatius, was a New America Foundation book which the New York Times Michiko Kaktani picked as one of the top 10 books of all books, includes the fiction too, of the year, and it was outstanding. Of course, Zbigniew Brzezinski is a counselor and trustee of the CSIS, Center for Strategic International Studies Advisory Board. He's the Osgood Professor of American Foreign Policy at Johns Hopkins, and he's chairman of the Center for Middle East Public Policy at the RAND Corporation, and he's often on Morning Joe, which we'll let him talk to on MSNBC. That is the more fun stuff. And I will just say there was a great line, I put it on my own blog, The Washington Note, recently, where he was on there with Joe Scarborough and his daughter, Micah Brzezinski, and he was talking about the Middle East peace process, and he says, T-A-B-A. Taba, read up on it. You might learn something, to Joe Scarborough. And of course, my friend Abdullah Ali Reza, Minister of Commerce of Saudi Arabia, former state minister, National U.S. Arab Chamber of Commerce co-chairman, and really one of the real godfathers of this event today. So I want to thank all of you for being here. Without further ado, please welcome Senator Chuck Hagel, who's going to make some opening comments. Senator Hagel.
Steve, thank you. Steve, thank you. Steve, thank you. And to each of you this morning, good morning. Thank you for attending and your continued attention and leadership to the great issues of our time. I also want to note those who are on the stage this morning and have been introduced. It's obvious that I am the weak link in the group this morning, but I acknowledge that. I want to thank them for their continued leadership at a very critical time in our world, and to so many of you in the audience who have devoted much of your lives to not just the peace process in the Middle East, but to public service. We have a number of ambassadors here with us this morning, current ambassadors, former ambassadors, many former U.S. ambassadors, some former U.S. ambassadors to Saudi Arabia and other Middle Eastern countries, and to each of you, thank you for your continued service. I was very proud and pleased that Steve asked me to be part of this. Now that I am but a mere mortal, once again, having no standing in life, no one pays attention. I'm not sure anybody ever did, but we senators think they do, and we always have access to, if nothing else, the floor of the Senate. So I don't get invited often to these important events, and I appreciated noting that I have a couple of jobs. I don't have one real job. It is honest work, what I'm doing now. And the association with Georgetown is particularly important for me, although terming my new job there as distinguished professor, in the words of one of my brothers who is a real professor, a professor of law at the University of Dayton, he believes I have set back education in America by generations. But he's 2 years younger, always been quite envious of the heights that I've achieved, and I've learned to live with it, as many of you have had that issue with your families. But I am very proud to be associated with Georgetown, and of course the Atlantic Council and other organizations and institutions I'm involved with. Last important point this morning before I share some thoughts on why we are gathered here today on a very important topic. I was rejoicing this morning, I know as many of you who follow the NFL draft. Some of you think that's beneath your status, I know, to acknowledge that, but nonetheless, I know you you do follow the NFL draft, and we have in Nebraska worked our way through and maneuvered around some rather difficult times over the last few years, the Cornhuskers. And we are proud now this morning that the Washington Redskins have drafted one of our players. So there is great joy in the heartland this morning. My phone was ringing off the hook. We were bouquets. Champagne was being popped at Beaver Crossing, Nebraska this morning at 3 o'clock for Cody Glenn. So I thought that was a particularly important thing to share with you all this morning. But I'm still working my way through bad habits I picked up in the Senate, being completely superfluous at important times. As Steve recited in his opening comments, we have many of the Obama administration key foreign policy figures in the Middle East and in that region today. If nothing else points us to the seriousness of that region, then that should. We have a new administration in office less than 100 days, but yet this one issue, the peace process, the larger framework of all the dynamics that fit within that arc, is now in play like we've not seen in a long time. And what I mean by that is, let's just, as we must always do in any review or inventory of great challenges, is let's look at the facts. It is my opinion, and I've said so over the years, that I think the Middle East is more dangerous today than it was 5 years ago, or 8 years ago, or 10 years ago. I think it's more combustible today. I think there is far less margin of error today, for the reasons that we all accept. And if we, the United States, and our allies, and especially the nations that reside in that region of the world, are to be successful in moving this issue to some higher ground, a higher ground to get to the objective of some resolution of this issue, then it is going to require a new frame of reference. It's going to require what I think President Obama has been doing in his foreign policy team the last 100 days, and that is constructing a new diplomatic platform to deal with these 21st century challenges. 20th century infrastructure isn't going to work. 20th century realities are not 21st century realities. And as we examine the world with some clarity and reverse the optics, as we must do, which we often do not do when we're dealing with other countries, we understand fully that we all, 6.5 billion people on the face of the earth today, live in a global community. That global community is underpinned by a global economy. It is fueled by energy. And every challenge America has today is global. It's international. They are not these challenges somehow specific to or indigenous to us, whether it's environmental issues, energy issues, terrorism, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Look at what dominates much of the news this morning. Swine flu. The possibility of a global health pandemic. These are very clear indicators that no longer can we direct foreign policy or frame foreign policy, implement foreign policy, any policy, in narrow channels. It is going to require a higher platform of understanding that the world is completely interconnected. That is going to require a much wider lens view of our relationships. I think, and I have said for many years, I think it's going to require a new 21st century set of alliances that are going to be required to bring the interests of nations together, the common interests, building on those common interests, not building on our differences, to build this new array of 21st century coalitions of common interests. After World War II, that's what we did. That's what Marshall and Eisenhower and Truman, and Acheson, Hull, Vandenberg came together with our partners around the world and built these new coalitions of common interest based on common interests. We didn't define those relationships on our specific differences. We have differences. We have differences with Saudi Arabia. We have differences with a lot of countries. But we need to be far wiser in how we come at these great issues today. As powerful as America is, we can't solve one of these issues alone. We can't get close to finding a resolution by ourselves. It is folly to believe that. And the further we find ourselves working ourselves into cul-de-sacs that we can't get out of because we have dissipated our resources, because we have wasted our influence and our focus, because we have not prioritized on the big issues. We must get the big issues and the big relationships right. Saudi Arabia is a big relationship. It's an important relationship. Saudi Arabia's interests are wrapped around our interests, not just in the Middle East, but surely in South Asia. We all know in this room there is no resolution or beginning of a resolution in Afghanistan without Pakistan. In fact, the epicenter of the greatest threats in the world today are in South Asia and Central Asia. They never were in Iraq. They are not in Iraq. We must be very careful, this administration, that they do not get further bogged down in occupying countries. And I believe now that we are bogged down in two countries, and the president's going to have to make some more difficult decisions on Afghanistan and Pakistan, it further erodes our ability to maneuver diplomatically and militarily. And it all comes back to this larger framework and platform of a new 21st century understanding of the realities of the world that we live in, and then how do we move this up onto a higher ground. 2 points to this, and I will then be very interested in hearing what my colleagues have to say. This is something that can't wait. There is an immediacy to this, there is an urgency to this, and the longer that the president waits before he moves, specifically on a plan for the Middle East, and I would suggest that I have before that the 2002 Beirut Declaration that was laid down by then the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, now the King, was a spectacular starting point. Why we walked away from that is astounding. I know, and you know, we were planning an invasion of Iraq. But that was a remarkable document for many reasons. TABA 2001 needs to be reviewed, but the president needs to move on this quickly. Second, we know from history that presidents and leaders of nations become entangled and become drugged down into the underbrush by the force of events. And if you don't get out ahead of this and on top of this and move quickly on these areas and these issues and these dynamics, then the force of events will essentially strangle leadership. And partly that's not just that status quo, but it's other issues as well. So as I would conclude with this comment, I think we have a remarkable opportunity here. It won't, this opportunity, be on the table for a long, unending time. There's a confluence in the world today of events, of crises, of dynamics that make things possible. But it's going to take American leadership, direct presidential involvement, committed leadership, working with our allies, asking our allies for more help, asking our allies to participate in something definitive. And it's a false choice to believe that somehow we have to take the side of Israel against the Arabs, or we take the side of the Arabs against Israel. That is a false choice. We lived with that false choice too long, and it has produced a very dangerous stalemate that we need to break and get above. Well, with that, again, I thank our panel. I thank certainly the two founding organizations here, and appreciate an opportunity to say hello, and be glad to, when it's my time, respond to questions.
Thank you, Senator. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I never go with the order we say we're going to. I'm going to ask Dr. Zbigniew Brzezinski now to share his thoughts. Dr. Brzezinski?
Steve, Professor Hagel, ladies and gentlemen, I have a very simple message. It seems to me that there is an urgent need for an American, Saudi Arabian, genuine alliance for peace in the Middle East. We haven't had that. We have at times worked together. We have certainly many shared interests. We have historical bonds of friendship, but we have also had disagreements. Some of our activities have been out of joint or out of time. And lately, the United States has not engaged itself seriously in the promotion of peace in the Middle East. And I think it's fair to say that while the 2002 Saudi initiative was most historically important, it could have come sooner. But that's the past. I think we need to work together, and we have to draw some fundamental lessons from the experience of the previous century. In the previous century, the 20th century, Europe twice committed suicide. And it took a lot of effort, including American effort, to help bring Europe to its feet. It committed suicide because it couldn't handle nationalist, ethnic, territorial, and yes, even also religious conflicts on its own. It succumbed to the easy temptation of trying to resolve conflicts by force. But force tends to produce unpredictable consequences. It tends to escalate. It tends to get out of hand. And this is why it's so urgent to recognize, in regards to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or the problem with Iran, or the issues involving Afghanistan and Pakistan, or the growing tensions within various countries of the Middle East, political, social, and religious, external threats, as for example, Saudi Arabia recently expressed concerns about threats emanating from South Yemen, religious differences, not only between Jews and Christians, or Jews and Muslims, or Muslims and Christians, but also among Muslims, the Sunni and the Shiites, that none of these issues in the present context in the Middle East can be constructively resolved by conflict. But if there is not to be conflict, peace has to be institutionalized, it has to be reinforced, it has to be built with deliberate effort, and as Professor Hagel said, with a real sense of urgency. Because in fact, a number of problems in the Middle East proper, and Middle East at large, are getting out of hand. The opportunities for a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict are beginning to fade away. If we don't move soon, there will be no peace. But if there is no peace, what will there be? There will be a resumption of conflict, and we had a little preview of it last December in Gaza. And we know what the consequences are. And that will require a major American commitment, stemming from a very practical realization the two parties to the conflict cannot resolve it on their own. We know that. If 30 years of experience is not evidence of that, then I don't know what evidence is. The United States has to be actively engaged as a peacemaker, and that means the United States has to be willing to spell out at least the minimum parameters of peace so that the parties are then propelled towards serious negotiations. We need to do that. Saudi Arabia needs to help. We can do it from the outside. Saudi Arabia is in the region. Saudi Arabia can influence the Arab countries, the Arab political movements. Saudi Arabia can mitigate some of the tendencies towards extremism within the population, and particularly within some of its more fundamentalist religious manifestations. We need this initiative to be comprehensive, large-scale, and mutually reinforcing. And if we don't do it together, we and the Arabs around Israel and Palestine, it's not going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, it will become worse. War is not a solution for the problem posed in the region by Iran. If there is a conflict with Iran, either provoked by someone or initiated by us, the consequences for the region will be devastating. They'll be devastating for us as well. Let's have no illusion about that. There is no solution to the problem of Iran. In a narrow sense, the nuclear program. In a larger sense, the role of Iran in the region that can be achieved by war. And let's not be tempted by it. Let's not have anyone urge us privately to do it, even if not publicly. And let us not have anyone else provoke it. And I think if we're conscious about this imperative, we can avoid a conflict which will be self-destructive for the region. Not to mention the fact that it will probably undermine America's role in the world, and whether one likes it or not, a constructive American role in the world is the only alternative to global chaos from which everyone suffers. So the stakes are enormous. I could go on and talk about Afghanistan, Pakistan, but Senator Hagel has mentioned that, and very aptly. My central message is very simple. If we want to deal with these problems, we have to work in concert. We have to take certain initiatives that we have long delayed in taking. And Saudi Arabia has to provide affirmative, assertive, outspoken leadership, not wait for others to act, but to be a partner. We need, in brief, an American, Saudi Arabian, genuine alliance for peace in the Middle East. Thank you.
Dr. Brzezinski, thank you very much. Let me now invite Prince Turki Al Faisal.
Thank you. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أفضل المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Ladies and gentlemen, to follow Chuck Hagel and Big Brzezinski is not an easy task. And I must say that if there is anything you can say about Chuck Hagel, it's that he is not superfluous. It's big. I remember on your visit to Riyadh many years ago, he insisted on having a swim at 7 o'clock in the morning. And we had to find him a swimming pool, because Riyadh in those days didn't have too many swimming pools. Fortunately, we did, and events after that justified his swim, because then we worked on working together to rid Afghanistan of the Soviet occupation. But it's nice to see many familiar faces in this room. I would say that I would like to see unfamiliar faces as well. I am an ex, and I think there are lots of exes here. We'd like to see more people who are engaged in the decision-making of the United States, and not just from the administration. The congressional leadership, I think, and the representation is sorely missing in the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States since September 11th, 2001. When I was ambassador here, I tried my best to get senators and congressmen to visit the kingdom without much success. And I'm sure my successor is having the same difficulty. So if any of you have any influence with the Congress, please use that influence. We need to have senators and congressmen come to Saudi Arabia. It's not enough for the administration to send envoys. We need that chamber, or those two chambers, to be fully engaged in the alliance that Brzezinski proposes between Saudi Arabia and the United States. And I would make this appeal because I see the differences between having an engaged Congress and not. So that's one aspect I wanted to mention to you. And those of you in the business community, in the academic world, in all of the walks of life in America, please, whatever influence you have, exercise it. Let me just go on to briefly mention some topics that are on my mind, and I think perhaps on other people's mind. One, of course, is the Palestinian-Israeli issue. We don't need more plans from Mr. Obama. We have all the plans in the world. Let's get them all implemented, if it's possible. And it's been encouraging to hear Mr. Obama talk about his commitment to finding peace in the Middle East. It's been encouraging to see Hillary Clinton engaged as she is. It's encouraging that George Mitchell is doing his rounds in the area. But I think the time is drawing short when we will need to see implementation and not just simply verbal expressions of commitment. That's something we had a lot of in the past. We don't want any more of that. And another aspect, I think, of this is on Lebanon as well. I proposed that the United States should immediately ask Israel to withdraw from Shab'a and the other areas still occupied by the Israelis in Lebanon. That is a crucial step for all of us to accomplish, and it is only the United States can get the Israelis out of there. It is no excuse whatsoever that the Israelis say that they occupied them from Syrian forces back in 1967 and that they will not hand them back unless they have a Syrian-Israeli agreement. That is a false pretense that needs to be checked, and it needs to be nullified by direct U.S. intervention. And I think the U.S. can achieve that. Who these territories should be handed to, I think they should be handed to the United Nations. And if there is any dispute between Lebanon and Syria about them, that's a Lebanese-Syrian dispute. It should not have Israel in the middle of it. By removing that issue from the table, you remove the issue of national liberation from Lebanese politics. And when you do that, you will make it much easier for Lebanese political forces inside Lebanon to actively engage in national reconciliation and, if you like, the results of the coming elections in Lebanon. On Afghanistan, Pakistan as well, as has been mentioned many times, and I'm not going to repeat it here, but I think the United States policy at the moment is correct if it is implemented correctly. President Obama identified the problem in the area, which is the terrorists, whether they be on the Pakistani side or on the Afghan side. And I think he should canvass worldwide support to get these terrorists and provide the necessary resources for that, military, economic, political, and otherwise. Achieve the objective of either capturing or killing the terrorist leaders in the area there, declare victory, and get out. It is no good to have NATO and US forces on Afghan soil, nor is it good to have American Predator aircraft bombing Pakistani villages and killing Pakistani civilians, although they may also be killing some terrorist leaders among them, because that only increases the antagonism towards America, and it undermines the glue that keeps Pakistan together, which is its armed forces. The armed forces of Pakistan are the only viable institution that keeps Pakistan together. The government is working very hard to try to accomplish things, but it will not be able to do that if the Pakistani armed forces are undermined. And they are being undermined by these attacks. And I think the United States can get, as I said, worldwide support in going after the terrorists if it simply declares that that is its end objective in Afghanistan. Not nation building, not democracy, not the other very attractive slogans that people may hear about intentions in Afghanistan or Pakistan. I would conclude by saying that Saudi Arabia, in the past 81 years since we began our engagement with Americans through Arthur, come on, Peter, tell me. Charles R. Crane, the American philanthropist who visited Saudi Arabia in 1928. And when King Abdulaziz had him for dinner and talked about water resources, he promised to send the king one of his geologists to look at these water resources. And he sent a man called Carl Twitchell, who spent more than 6 months in Saudi Arabia, traveling from north to south and from east to west. And he came back with a report to the king, and he said, "King, you have no water." And he also said, "Don't believe anybody who would tell you that you do. But you have oil." And the rest is history. So on energy matters, I would say that politicians in the United States are, I'm not going to use the word criminally, but I think I would use the word sorely deficient in proposing that the United States can be energy independent. And I think they're deceiving their people by saying that. There should be a comprehensive, interdependent energy program, not just for the United States, but for the rest of the world community. And Saudi Arabia is willing and able to do its part in any such endeavor. And I leave you with the grace of God. Thank you.
Thank you much, Prince Turki. We'll be back to some of those issues. Now welcome my boss and who works me hard, Rita Hauser.
Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. For those who were not present at dinner last night, I'm sorry you missed it. I had the pleasure of introducing our speakers, my good friends Prince Turki and Brent Scowcroft. Brent sends his regrets he had to be elsewhere today. But since I was a polite host, I couldn't take issue with some of the comments that each of them made, so I'm going to use my time here to do that, particularly on the Palestine-Israel issue. Brent and I have been arguing and discussing this for I can't tell you how long, but he summed up his position by stating last night that it's all up to the American president. Well, I would say a conditional yes, a conditional maybe. It is not sufficient. A president's engagement, of course, without that nothing happens. But in our history in this area, in the Palestine-Israel conflict, each time an American president has taken a very active role, it has alas been to the exclusion of other players. We have generally tended to push aside others who have interests and who can bring something to the table, particularly the European Union and the host of Arab countries, which I can say was summed up in King Abdullah's very original and very wise approach in 2002. Now, I fear that that may well happen again, given the engagement thus far by Obama, Mitchell, Clinton, etc. And in my opinion, it simply won't work. And I'd like to start out by talking first about Hamas, which to me is the central element in unlocking the deadlock at the moment between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Hamas is on the ground and will control whatever happens on the ground in Gaza. And I don't know how many of you here have been to Gaza since the war. It is lamentable beyond lamenting. And there is no way that any reconstruction can take place without the involvement on the ground of Hamas, which means, in my way of thinking, that you've got to get Hamas and Fatah back into operation together. Now, that's very difficult for a U.S. president to propose for all the reasons that are self-evident to everyone in this room. Therefore, it seems to me a good way to start doing this is to let the Europeans continue their tentative dialogue with Hamas. I would urge upon my friend Prince Turki that rather than, as he said last night, having the Egyptians do it, who have lots of conflicts with Hamas, that the Saudis and the other Arabs come back into the picture and try to seek a reconciled government between Hamas and Fatah. From my way of thinking, nothing is possible on the Palestine-Israel front until you have a unified Palestinian government. And I think it is very much in the interest of the current Israeli government to prevent that from happening. As I always thought and said long ago, that Sharon would pull out of Gaza, not only because of the demographic considerations, but because he believed it would lead to chaos among the Palestinians, and therefore preclude having a real partner that he would be compelled to deal with. And that is how the events played out. So that's the first thing that I would urge an American administration now to do, which is to let others do the task with Hamas. Secondly, yes, of course, we have to press on the Israelis. I find that's going to be a very difficult task given the makeup of the current Israeli government, which is not exactly a normative kind of government that we are used to. It's a very right-wing government, very much hinged in a coalition on partners that are not interested in the peace process. So it's going to be very difficult, and merely having George Mitchell, whom I admire greatly, run around the area and propose various things is not going to produce any effective result. A lot of it is going to have to come from within the area and with the support of Saudi Arabia and others of the Arab nations in the region. And there I share Zbig's view that we really need an effective U.S.-Saudi working alliance. The other question that Prince Turki just briefly touched on, which is Lebanon, Syria, is I'd like to come to that. Lebanon hopefully will have peaceful elections in about 6 weeks. Can't predict the outcome, but I think it'll be fairly safe to say that Hezbollah will score as well, perhaps even better, and be very much a part of the Lebanese government. And so I always put the question, if we deal with Lebanon, and there in the American body politic, there's a general view that we want a unified Lebanon. We deal with Hezbollah in that government. I don't understand why it becomes so taboo to think of dealing with the Palestinians, including Hamas. And in my prediction, as I said before, we'll get there, but we'll get there painfully. Lebanon is going to face a series of very difficult challenges. First among them is the results of the tribunal, which will shortly hand down its conclusions as to the Hariri assassination. This was set up under the UN resolutions. From what I'm hearing from the prosecutor, whom I spoke to in New York, I think there will clearly be indications of Syrian involvement. The only thing that is not clear is as yet how high up will be those who will be named in the what we would call indictments in the United States legal system. That's going to be a difficult issue to deal with, but it will have to be confronted. I believe the Israelis, if they are pressed by this administration, they will always, as they try to do, deflect and say, let's do Syria first. Syria is easy to do. Let's leave the Palestinian issue second. I don't share that view, but that's the way they will probably approach the question. On that one, too, I find it difficult to see how we're going to have any kind of a breakthrough, given that both Bibi Netanyahu and Lieberman, in the course of the campaign, repeatedly said the Golan will not be given up, and they have not had any forthcoming approaches to some of the other territorial issues, including Sheba Farms, as has just been mentioned. So the U.S. on those two key issues has got some very heavy duty going, and I don't believe, as I said at the outset, that we can do it alone. It's inconceivable to me that with all the goodwill and devotion that Obama and company will have to this question, that we will get anywhere without the support of others, particularly the Arabs and the European Union. And I would urge a direct shift to bringing in lots of partners in order to accomplish what has been the most elusive, the most difficult, and in many ways the most depressing foreign policy challenges we have faced. It is now way past 40 years of an occupation by Israel of the West Bank and Gaza. And as you have heard, and I know you know, that in many intellectual circles in Palestine particularly, there is a view that this has become a permanent occupation, and that it will never be resolved by the forces of diplomacy, but only by the long-term demography in which the Palestinians will ultimately outweigh the Israelis. That's a very doleful view, but it is one that is gaining currency given the perpetual stalemate we have had over all these decades. So those are my comments about what we have to do on a realistic basis to get this process moving in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita.
Good job, Rita.
You know, there's nothing better than a panel discussion among ultra-realists who slightly disagree. So we were going to enjoy this. Now, I'll welcome the Minister of Commerce and Industry of Saudi Arabia, Abdullah Ali Reza.
Rita, very good.
I'm faced with a dichotomous situation. It's never that easy to be the last speaker after such distinguished panel. But it makes life easier because everything that you need to say has already been said. So I am approaching this from a different angle. But before I do, I really would like to thank my friend Steve for the effort that he has put in coming up with this conference. When I threw the gauntlet at him a couple of years ago, he thought about it, but then he thought about it in a sense that it was really opportune for the Saudi-US relationship to be able to be exposed after such long hibernation for the last 8 years. To be able to do that, that took a great deal of risk. But I'm happy that the New American Foundation, a very prestigious think tank, has partnered with the Saudi CIT. To have partnership and collaboration between these two augurs well for the relationship. And I'd like to thank you again, Steve. I'm approaching this from a different angle, as I said. It is my fervent hope that today's discussion will help to lay the cornerstone for a new value-added relationship between our two countries. Without a doubt, we have been told, and I will repeat, that the US-Saudi partnership is solid, withstanding the trials and the tribulations of the recent past. But US-Saudi relationship must be built on shared values, mutual respect, and a commitment to collaborate in developing new value-added elements of our relationships. Together, we can strongly focus on building intellectual capital, a knowledge-based economy, educational reform, promoting and encouraging deeper institutional collaboration in order to reinvigorate our mutual interests. The values voiced by President Obama are warmly welcomed in Saudi Arabia as a serious glimmer of hope. We need to be sanguine, however, at a time when pessimism is pervasive in the region. We need to work together to reverse past failures. However, we are now entering a new epoch. A new era can be paved by two visionary leaders, President Obama and King Abdullah. Remarkably, both leaders share a common path. In their own way, they have embarked on a campaign forward to achieving greater harmony in the global arena. President Obama's message of renewal and collaboration with the Arab and Muslim world, and especially Saudi Arabia, is has positively left an imprint in Saudi Arabia. King Abdullah's initiative of the Arab Peace Plan, as well as the initiation of the interfaith dialogue, both in Spain and in the United Nations, represents the kingdom's value proposition to the world of nations. King Abdullah has also pursued reconciliation within the Arab world and has established himself as a respected champion on humanitarian and just causes. We simply cannot afford to waste the opportunity to have our two nations benefit from greater interaction. King Abdullah and President Obama speak the same language and understand that through dialogue and persuasion, peace and stability can be achieved. Our shared history and mutual interests have brought our nations together into partnerships. Both our nations have a deep respect for values. We both seek stability in the Middle East, without which, and as we have been told today by all the distinguished panelists, we cannot make any progress in the region either at the political or the economic level. We both have fought against the spread of terrorism based on the shared values we hold regarding peace and stability. All aspects of our partnership play an important role. But as your former Secretary of Commerce, Mickey Cantor, said, strategic considerations have made us allies, but the ties of trade have brought us truly together. Indeed, Saudi Arabia is America's biggest trading partner in the Middle East, and America is our largest trading partner, both in terms of imports and exports. Last year, our bilateral trade volume exceeded $68 billion compared to $160 million in 1970. But at the same time, we live in a very challenging and turbulent world as a result of the impact of the financial crisis. Much needs to be done, as much as has been damaged. We cannot succumb to the temptation of beggar thy neighbor policies, which are an anathema to global trade. Protectionism will threaten the prospects for recovery and prolong the global downturn. All too long, we lived in a world that prized short-term gains based on greed, avarice, and irresponsibility without considering the long-term consequences. We need to look at the global architecture that at its core is caring and responsible. When I talk about adding value to our relationship, first and foremost, we need to move beyond the current notion of region building through creative destruction to one in which soft power is wielded intelligently by integrating countries into the clubs of good citizenship at the global and the regional level. Creative destruction, as has been mentioned, must be replaced by creative restructuring and creative engagement. Both King Abdullah and President Obama are committed to this cause. Therefore, the challenge for U.S.-Saudi relations is creating conditions for this type of collaboration within and across countries. And all the speakers talked about the need to be able to move in that direction. We must structure U.S.-Saudi relations in a way which allows for more broadly defined bilateral interest, which also supports the institution of global and regional clubs of good citizenship. Together, we need to explore ways of blending private and public capital, leveraging private and civil society networks and ingenuity, organizational skills, and access to markets to improve the lives of real people. Elite-centric approaches to foreign policy will no longer suffice. But there is no substitute for domestic institutions. Hence, U.S.-Saudi bilateral relations must be broadened to reflect new priorities, mainly the creation of intellectual capital and knowledge sharing as the only real guarantee of equality of opportunity for citizens in our countries and stability for the rest of the Middle East. The aim of this initiative will be to foster the creation of knowledge societies, to share information and research tools in education and education enhancement. Saudi financial capital and U.S. expertise in research and development could be combined in a way to address some of the most pressing scientific, social, and economic challenges. Saudi Arabia is moving away from simply being a gas station of the world toward a sophisticated laboratory of excellence, innovation, and knowledge. We know that we have a long way to go, but we have embarked on that path, and we're not looking back. Our economy is being transformed, and the youth is our strength. Let me try to cut it off here, because part of the problem I have with being the last speaker, I don't want to overstay my welcome. So I think if all of us get the general drift that we have to build a very strong foundation to this bilateral relationship, what happened in the last 8 years wouldn't have happened in putting U.S.-Saudi relationship back into the closet. So I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Financial Times. And in that op-ed, he basically said, our patience is being tested, that there is a time limit, as it were, on the so-called King Abdullah Arab Peace Initiative. And President Obama stunned a lot of people by giving his first formal press interview to Al Arabiya, and in his comments, he referred specifically not to Prince Turki, but to the notion that might be taken off the table, and he basically requested patience. There's a bit of a difference between how Zbigniew Brzezinski has said this, as saying that the Arab-Israeli peace arrangement is really neither about the Palestinians nor the Israelis, it's about our geostrategic future. And Rita has said that's the wrong place to start, and you have to have other things in it. But Dr. Brzezinski, when you look at Asia, and you look there, we have the ASEAN Regional Forum, which is sort of a loose network, not an alliance, but at least a talking foundation among states with competing interests. What do you think, when you look at through the portal of the Arab Peace Initiative, this question about perhaps growing impatience of the process, do you think it's possible to shoot forward to something like an ASEAN Regional Forum with the key stakeholders in the Arab region, and that is the prospect of what might be lost if we don't move the Arab Initiative forward?
Well, I'm not quite sure I really quite understand the analogy with the ASEAN aspect. It seems to me that in the Middle East we have very specific two problems which are paramount, and the others are associated with it. One is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which of course brings to the surface a lot of historical memories and issues and problems. And these are not easy to resolve, and we have to overcome that by working together. And secondly, of course, is the question of the regional role of Iran, which happens to have not only a different cultural definition, but at least in some respects is even to some extent religiously differentiated from the Arab Middle East. Now, these two problems, I don't see the analogy to the ASEAN Regional Forum for dealing with them. I think they have to be resolved largely on the basis, first of all, of the collaboration of key players, and we are included, for better or for worse, as a player, in part because we stumbled, I think unintentionally, into an excessive assumption of a role previously played by Great Britain in the region. And in recent years, the way we manifested that reinforced the impression that in some respects we are a foreign intruder that is trying to impose our will on the region. This was not our subjective inclination, but that was the objective consequence of some of our acts. In that setting, it seems to me, it's simply essential that we do what we need to do, which is to act as the real mediator between the Israelis and the Palestinians along the lines of what Chuck Hagel was saying. That is to say, we really are the mediator, but not a mediator who's doing this out of some charitable inclination, but because we have a vital interest in that problem being resolved. And if it is to be resolved, it has to be resolved fairly. If it is resolved fairly, there is a chance that reconciliation will take root and endure. If it is not resolved fairly, it will not endure. And the two basic problems that have to be resolved in order for it to be fair is the problem of the right of return. And here I think we have to be realistic, even though it is painful and difficult for our Palestinian friends to accept this. There is not going to be a right of return in any real sense, except the most limited and symbolic right of return to Israel of the descendants of the Palestinian refugees and expellees. But there can be some compensation. There can be arrangements for their settlement elsewhere. there can be some acknowledgement of responsibility for what happened to them. That's one issue that has to be resolved. And the other issue that has to be resolved is, of course, Jerusalem. Jerusalem has to be shared fairly between the Israelis and the Palestinians. That is to say, two capitals in one city, a special regimen for the old city. Because if that isn't settled, one of the major sources of conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis, but more generally, the Arabs and the Israelis, is going to continue festering. We can only do that. And that is an issue that we have to address. If we address it more or less along the lines that I've mentioned, the entire international community will support it. I trust the Arab League will support it. And I think that will create a degree of momentum that can actually create a breakthrough in the Middle East. On the Iranian business, I think the key issue to realize is that it's a long-term process which will require progressive accommodation. Eventually, over time, a political evolution, which should not be put up front as a slogan, regime change, because actually that delays that change. But a political evolution which gives a legitimate role in the region to a country of 70 million people, of some significance, great historical traditions, but not as a revolutionary dominant force. That will require patience. We have to be involved in that. But the region has to be supportive and helpful. And this is why there is significant geostrategic room for a genuine American-Saudi Arabian alliance for peace in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. And that means commitment by both sides, and not rehashing past disagreements. Were we too passive? Were we over partial to Israel? Were the Arabs slow and forthcoming? I mean, we can each have our list of disappointments with the other. We have to work together on this geostrategically for the sake of the region, because otherwise this region will replicate in the 21st century what Europe experienced in the 20th century, but in the nuclear age with potentially much more destructive consequences.
I'll work on my ASEAN Regional Forum distracting metaphor another day. Rita?
Well, I surely share Zvig's view. We have also talked about it for decades, it seems to me. I'm not as optimistic as he that just by outlining a fair solution, and those solutions have been outlined also for decades, and I think everybody understands what they are. The problem is getting the parties to that solution, and that has always been the dilemma. So I don't think, as Prince Turki said, we need more solutions. We have them. I am still very skeptical about whether or not we are going to have a willing partner in the current Israeli government in any meaningful way, whether or not there is a Palestinian partner, because at the moment it is fractured.
Can I push you on that for just a moment? Dr. Brzezinski said on Scarborough's show that to some degree, the leadership in Israel, but also the Gaza crisis, essentially removes the fig leaf, if you will, the notion that you can earnestly achieve this balance, because neither side can achieve any balance on their own. So doesn't having Netanyahu and Avigdor Lieberman actually help convince people?
Since I have to leave, let me just clarify one point in response to Rita. The issue is not that the solutions have been articulated, because they've been dribbled out in bits and pieces here or there, kind of sotto voce. The need is for an explicit American position at the highest level on the fundamental issues, indicating what, in our view, the fair solution is. That has not been stated, ever. Mm-hmm. We didn't do it in Camp David I. We didn't do it in Camp David II. We have never done it. Bush has written various letters to Abbas, to the Israelis, but we haven't articulated our position. Once we did, the ball game would change significantly.
We're going to continue with Rita, but give a quick round of applause to Zbigniew Brzezinski. Thank you for being here. We have a lot of folks juggling heads. Thank you, Dr. Brzezinski. But Rita, can you pick up from there?
Yeah, I thoroughly hope Zbig is right. I have some hesitancy about whether that's the real answer to this key. I think any lawyer in the group here will readily recognize that you have parties to any kind of a dispute. We all know what the end game is going to be. You can tell the clients on both sides, this is how it's going to wind up, and you can never bring them to accept. That's always the hardest dilemma. How do you bring people to what is a fairly self-evident proposition? So I start with the difficulty of how do we get players to the table here on the Palestinian side and on the Israeli side. And I think it's going to be a hard go, but as I said in my opening remarks, people may disagree with me, I would start on the Palestinian side, which I think is simply the most dysfunctional. It is in total dysfunction at the moment. And there is an opening because Hamas must accept some outside help in large amounts to begin the reconstruction of Gaza, which has been totally and completely decimated. So you do have an opening there that can bring them perhaps, or some elements of Hamas, into a more working relationship with Fatah. So I would spend a lot of time on that end. Yes, talk to the Israeli government, of course, and I said to all the other partners, I don't see the Israeli government being broadly forthcoming at this point, not certainly this government. But I would begin that process. And I think anybody who thinks that it's just going to happen very quickly is not realistic about the state of the facts in the region. If we make some small gains over this next period, it will be great. You know, it's very interesting. George Mitchell spoke to a good friend of mine who Prince Turki knows well when he took on this assignment, and he said, you know, my wife was not too keen about this because it took me 5 years in Northern Ireland. And I said to her, don't worry, dear, I'll be back in a year. I think that is probably, as he, George, himself admitted, the most wildly bizarre optimism. I think if George could get Hamas and the Palestinians together in the course of the year, I would say chapeau.
Prince Turki.
There are several issues here that are interconnected. One, of course, is the issue between Hamas and Fatah. There are two reasons, in my view, why there are more difficulties today, particularly after the Gaza conflict, recently the Gaza war. One is that if you look at the surveys that were done after that conflict, the popularity of Hamas on the West Bank skyrocketed, and of course Mahmoud Abbas's Fatah plummeted. And in Gaza, it wasn't that clear, but quite clearly what was indicated was that Hamas did not gain as much support in Gaza as it did in the West Bank. So in terms of legitimization in the eyes of Palestinians, and particularly the average Palestinian, Hamas came out a winner from this Israeli assault on Gaza. The other side, Mahmoud Abbas's Fatah has been suffering from consistent and persistent Israeli denigration. And as such, its legitimization in the eyes of the Palestinian people as a promoter of a peaceful solution to the Palestinian problem with Israel has not been received well among the average Palestinian population. So there are things that can be done practically on both sides to justify or to encourage more legitimization, if you like, for Fatah by conceding to Fatah its demands on issues like the freeing of prisoners, the lifting of roadblocks, the more increased economic and business activity in the West Bank, and other indications that what Mahmoud Abbas has espoused as a philosophy, which is peaceful engagement with Israel, is paying dividends to the average Palestinian. On the Hamas side, I think what the Senator and Ms. Hauser and Mr. Brzezinski have mentioned, you have to engage with Hamas. You cannot simply ostracize and keep apart a legitimate representative of Palestinian opinion. And it is from that aspect as well that by engaging with Hamas, you draw them into the various channels and the talks that are taking place. I would go further than what Rita mentioned, simply leaving it to the Europeans to do that. I think there is a requirement, an imperative rather than a choice on the United States to do that. And you're right, the United States has dealt with the Lebanese government which has Hezbollah within it. Why not with the Palestinian Authority government that was elected in, when was it, 2005, 2006, and yet the U.S. Ostracized that government. There is no justification for that whatsoever. And whether legislatively or politically within the United States, that is something for the administration to push for and to get through. I would add to Brzezinski's comments on the two issues that he mentioned, Palestine and Iran, which is still festering, which is the issue of Iraq. I think Iraq deserves the attention and the continued, not just support, but clear definition of where the interests are, not just of the United States, but of the area in general. The Kingdom has supported all regional inclusive talks on Iraq. It was the first to call for the neighboring countries to come together in 2003, soon after the fall of the Saddam regime, and to invite Iran and Turkey and other countries in the area to sit down together on that. That's expanded now, and it includes the United States and Great Britain and other players, including the United Nations and the Iraqi government. I think more has to be done on that sense as well. My government has been reluctant in engaging with the Iraqi government, particularly in sending representation to Iraq, because if there is going to be a Saudi ambassador in Baghdad, he's going to be the target of immediate hijacking efforts, assassination efforts, you name it. And no government will risk the lives of its citizens as representatives and send them, as it were, to slaughter in a place like Baghdad. But nonetheless, I think there are ways that Saudi Arabia can do that, either by having intermittent representation in Baghdad for specific periods of time, just to show that we are sending a representative for the Iraqi people, and not leave the stage, as it were, free for the Iranians to do whatever they wish for.
Thank you.
Iran, let me just say something about Iran, if I may. I know I'm taking too much time on that. The platform from which the negotiations between the West and Iran on the nuclear issue started on the wrong foot. It started on the foot of carrot and stick. And that's a term, I think, that should be expunged from political and diplomatic language. When you come to our people and say, I'm going to give you a carrot or I'm going to wield a stick on you, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to slap you in the face and tell you, go to hell. So please, for American politicians and any administration, just remove that phrase from your lexicon and make it, on the issue of the atomic energy, a uniform and a proposal that includes all the countries, by declaring the Middle East free of weapons of mass destruction. And you can provide incentives and sanctions for the countries that join or do not join. The incentives are a nuclear umbrella of protection like Europe and Japan enjoys today from the United States, including economic and technical aid. And for the sanctions side, for the countries that don't want to join that grouping, you can have not just economic and other administrative sanctions, travel sanctions, etc., but also the proposition and the potential for the use of military force. And I think that can be justified if everybody comes on board.
I may invite you to guest blog at the Washington Note on that.
Okay.
That might be interesting. We're under some time pressure, and I'm going to apologize in advance to everyone, but I want to quickly ask for brief responses from Senator Hagel and Abdullah Ali Reza. Senator Hagel has often said that when you go around the world, you meet world leaders, you talk to people, that there's some doubt about America's ability to achieve its objectives today. That there are countries that have been allies who feel like our mystique has been punctured somewhat, so they can't quite count on us as much, and enemies are moving their agendas. And this was very much, when you were speaking, this is very much in my mind when we titled this, In a World Without Equilibrium. Do you think that the various measures we're talking about today are substantial enough, and that the United States can play a winning hand in this enough to get back to being a believable nation with leverage in the world? And to Minister Ali Reza, there's a lot of talk, and let's just be candid, about Iran's meddling in the region. And to some degree, if you go back to the old Cold War days and the Soviets would talk about correlation of forces, things haven't looked that good for our side, your side, in the sense that if people begin feeling as if the influence of Iran is clearly on the rise, that the meddling inside other countries is on the rise, the Taliban is on the rise in Afghanistan and Pakistan, are there things that Saudi in your world, commerce, industry, technology, can do that are genuine, that affect the broader Gulf region in an inspiring way, to sort of be more compelling as an alternative vision? I've asked you a big question, but I'm going to ask for a very brief response because we're up there. But Senator Hagel?
Steve, thank you. I begin with this point. I think we, the world, are all living through one of the most defining times in the history of man. I think we are seeing a reorientation of world affairs and dynamics we have never seen before at a rate of change we've never seen before. I think we are seeing a diffusion of geopolitical economic power that we've never seen before. That then, if any of that is right, and I think it is creating a new geopolitical center of gravity. Nations, events, issues, influences are all now coming together, what I noted in my earlier remarks, at an historic convergence that history rarely sees. Now, we can enter, the world, American leadership, an era of engagement and accommodation, or we can go the other way and see an era of chaos in the world. And I think we are right on the line. The region of the world that we're talking about here represents that center of gravity, because Iran, the Israeli-Palestinian issue, Iraq, Pakistan, Afghanistan, are all folded into the same envelope. They are woven into the same fabric. You can't disconnect any of these issues from the other issues. Why? You have religious issues, ethnic issues, cultural issues, geopolitical issues, economic issues. So to your question, I think America has an opportunity to regain and recapture that high ground of leadership, but it has to be on the basis, and I noted this again earlier, of reorienting our frame of reference, listening, turning our receivers on, turning more transmitters off, developing partnerships, alliances, relationships defined by common interest. It will be raggedy. It will be imperfect. It won't be exactly like we want all the time. But we can no longer go around the world and dictate to mankind and invade and occupy and say, you'll do it our way, if for no other reason than this reason. Every relationship in the world is maturing. Look at our relationships with Turkey and South Korea. They are not the same countries, nor do they have the same relationship with America today that we had 25 years ago. Mm-hmm. They have now graduated into their own realms. Relationships are that way. And those relationships must be relevant to the dynamics of the day's challenges and today's world. So, yes, I've detected what you have noted. I've written about it. I've spoken about it. I think we have an opportunity to change that. But I do think that the time here is now right on the line on how much time we have to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Minister.
Let me just say something that sort of pertains to Iraq in the initial stages. Please do not fall for the same trap that you felt in going to Iraq, that the road to Jerusalem goes through Baghdad. That's how you embarked probably on your biggest folly that you've ever made. If we do the same thing now by saying the only way we can get to Jerusalem is through Iran, then we have really opened up a wild west, if you will, in the Middle East. The question that we ask ourselves, do we have the capacity that the United States, with Saudi Arabia and its allies in the region, to work out a plan by which we will be consulted like we were not consulted on the Iraq situation? Even when we were consulted, it was put aside. So whatever we do, that we have to do it together and recognize that our interest in keeping the region in a stable situation so it does not go into a destructive mode through a push of a button. Saudi Arabia probably would be one of the first casualties in an attack on Iran by certain quarters. This is the only thing that they could actually do and be heard. And I think it's important that this consultation takes place at the highest level, and I'm happy to see that it's been done in the last, like tomorrow Dennis Ross is going to be there, George Mitchell was there. But that consultation, especially with King Abdullah, he knows the region. He has the respect of the leaders in the region. And the region will follow him because they recognize that Saudi Arabia will do what is best for the world community.
I know we're pushing it. I'm going to get the support of all of you in this marathon day. I don't believe in ever having a program without questions. So I'm going to grab a couple of quick questions. We'll just go a little bit over and we'll make it work. So I'm just going to quickly look here. This gentleman here sitting really fast. I'm going to take you. And before any response, Catherine Tiedemann, where are you over in this far? This gentleman right here, right in the middle. Go ahead, shoot, but make it brief.
Okay. Al-Watan newspaper, Saudi Arabia. Prime Minister Netanyahu is coming to town in a couple of weeks. What should the president tell him? This is a question for Senator Hagel.
Excellent. And there was a gentleman right here. Grab the microphone. Go ahead.
Yes, Senator Hagel, this question is about U.S.-Saudi relations. How do you value your own personal position on the fact that the U.S. has really had in bed with the Saudi government for such a long time, a government that is, everybody knows, xenophobic, against women, against Shia, and to the degree that the practice of marrying children made popular by the ruling family is the only country that legalized that. So I want your own personal position, given that extremists have said U.S. has been hypocritical about being a democratic nation and at the same time supporting this medieval government.
Thank you. The Wirtz question. One other question over here. Did I see Imad? Did you have your hand up? No? Okay. Right there, the lady in the back. Is that Elise?
Yeah.
Elise Labit of CNN.
Thank you. I guess this would be for Prince Turki. Notwithstanding everyone's desires for the Obama administration to kind of push a settlement between Israelis and Palestinians, we're also hearing a lot, especially since King Abdullah of Jordan just visited, about possibly trying to institute some kind of incremental, step-by-step approach where, while you're pushing negotiations, you also have the Israelis take some steps, such as halting settlements or easing the daily hardships that Palestinians face, so that the Arabs could then take some reciprocal steps. And as the minister has said, perhaps Saudi Arabia could lead something like this because the Arabs would follow him. Do you think that that's something that the Arabs would be willing to do while you push forward on negotiations?
My piggyback is, does sequencing the Arab Peace Initiative help it or kill it? So Senator Hagel?
Which question?
Any you'd like. This gentleman here who asked about, this is something I thought about a lot in having this relationship, is I'm very familiar with questions raised, and I think it's one of the reasons why this, I was watching Harry Potter the other day, and the bad guy in Harry Potter, I'm not very good at pop culture, is the guy whose name can't be mentioned or can't be talked about, and this is ridiculous. With the U.S.-Saudi relationship is vital at every strategic turn that we take, and we hide it. So to some degree, that's my response. But Senator Hagel, your view?
And I'll be very brief and direct. I generally noted in my earlier comments that nations have differences. We, the United States, have differences with other countries, with other governments. And I think it is my opinion that the world can achieve mutual objectives if we work on some kind of a cooperative plane to develop influences within a government, within a country, within a society to try to correct certain issues that we think are important. So those differences we have on social matters with any country, including Saudi Arabia, will be there. But I've always believed that what's most important is the larger dynamic of the relationship. What is most important? Essentially trying to avert blowing up the world, and some of the big issues that we've got to deal with up on top, or constantly redefining relationships based on differences down at a societal level. Doesn't mean they're not important. Not at all. And there'll be differences, continue to be differences, but I also think, as Prince Turki said, and I think he's right, you don't exhibit or develop influence in a country with another government by beating the hell out of them or publicly or embarrassing them. There's an entire inventory of instruments that you use to try to develop influence for your country, your values, your standards. You do it the smart way or you do it the dumb way. Now, there was a question over here.
Netanyahu.
I would say, as the Prime Minister comes to talk with President Obama, first, I'd listen carefully if I was President Obama. What do you think, Mr. Prime Minister, is the course of action? Where do we go? How do we do it? We are going to do something, if for no other reason than there's not a country in the world that the reconciliation, the efforts to achieve some stability and security in your area of the world is more important than for Israel. Israel is the biggest benefactor of any country in the world to find a new dynamic of peace. And I would say to the Prime Minister, we all, the community of nations, intend to lead a new effort. And I, President Obama, am going to put my own imprimatur on this. I am going to engage myself on this. I have put some of the best people we have on this. But this is not just a press conference or a press op every 30 days. This is getting it done, and it's going to be based on the common interest of your region and your countries. And I would make that very clear, and I would listen to the Prime Minister and work it from there.
Prince Turki, quick response on whether sequencing the Arab Initiative helps or hurts.
The Henry Siegman described the Arab Peace Initiative as the result of negotiations and not a negotiating tool. It's a vision of where the world will be once the negotiations are finished between the Palestinians and the Israelis, Syrians and the Israelis, and the Lebanese and the Israelis, the countries that still have territories occupied by Israel. So my answer would be that sequencing in this matter, and particularly when it comes to issues like borders between Palestine and Israel, Jerusalem, as Brzezinski said, and refugee problem, is not going to be a sequential arrangement whereby if Israel, for example, lifts a roadblock in the West Bank in trying to show some kind of goodwill towards the Palestinians, Saudi Arabia will establish a consulate in Jerusalem. That's not going to work. And it's going to complicate matters rather than make them easier.
So I think the answer is it will hurt.
It definitely it will hurt. And I will just say something, if I may intrude, on the question that was posed to Senator Hagel about what Netanyahu should expect to hear. I never thought I would disagree with the Senator on anything, but on this case I would. And that is, when Netanyahu comes and begins to talk to Mr. Obama and begins to say, Mr. President, this is what the President should shut him off immediately and say, Mr. Netanyahu, you have to listen to me first. And this is what I think should be done to make the proposal come through. And the same with Arab leaders as well. And this is, I think, what has been missing in this American Arab and Israeli dispute is that there has not been an American position put forward, as Brzezinski said, as an end vision for peace in the area.
I'll just paraphrase just to Elise's comment real quick, and paraphrase Brent Scowcroft, whose comments last night were on the record, where he basically addressed this and said, beware of process and code words that undermine the objectives and goals. Now there. Rita Hauser, any final comments?
Well, I would, like my friend Turkey here, I would be very blunt with Bibi. I would say I'm committed to a two-state solution. Are you? We believe the Annapolis Accords are binding. Do you? Since during the course of the campaign there was a lot of blather about they're not bound by the Annapolis Accords. And what concrete are you prepared to do to alleviate the plight in Gaza so that something could be announced positive at the end of their meetings to say the Israelis are going to open some border crossings, let food and other things move in, and so on. I think Bibi needs to know, and there I do disagree with you, Chuck, I think Bibi needs to know that the president means business. If he doesn't know that, he has his own business and will figure out very quickly how to wiggle around any president, as has been done before. Now, settlements, you'll get the same stuff. We're not expanding, we're enhancing, we're enriching, it's population growth. You can, any number of metaphors and expressions that the Israelis have used to constantly expand the settlements. I personally wouldn't get involved in that mishmash now because I don't think that the president's going to get anything on it. I would concentrate on a concrete resolution of some of the pressing issues in Gaza, which would give a very strong statement to the Palestinians that the President of the United States understands their plight and what has to happen next, but it would also be something that he won't get a tremendous amount of flack from the Congress, which is always the problem for any American president in this business.
May I just respond quickly, because I did emphasize in my second point, Rita, the absolute, I used the word, I'm going to put my imprimatur on that. So I don't want to make sure you're confused by that. But
you're not saying that Obama should be casual through this meeting.
No, I made that pretty clear. But I do think it is important to listen.
Yes, of
and
course.
And that's, I think, a matter of just courtesy. When President Obama bowed to the king, that was a gesture of courtesy.
Absolutely.
And I do believe, and maybe it was my mother who reinforced this, I don't think it costs much, a little courtesy. And I think when you're dealing with an elected official of another country and they are your guests, you listen to them. Then you can say what you want to say. But don't make any mistake about...
You're saying drop the swagger.
No, but my serious point is, don't make any mistake that I've backed off where I've been publicly on this many, many years. The absolute leadership of an American president saying, we're going to do it, I'm going to be involved in it, and laying out those parameters.
Good.
I'm going to ask Peter from his chair, and also, as we close this up, Minister, we had a forum a couple of years ago at New America Foundation with some very, very important international economic thinkers and players and people who are in the Obama administration now, and we had our geostrategic discussion. Our geostrategic discussion was about as gloomy as Rita Hauser's prognosis on things. Our geoeconomic forum 3 years ago, people saw no trouble on the horizon. And it was fascinating. I said, either our world's going to get a lot better or your world's going to get a lot worse. So for both of you, from just very quick commerce and the economic viewpoint, do you see, would you be investors in your neighborhood? Do you see things really improving on the political and geostrategic side? The hope of that, and the hope sincere, or why you're here today is you're worried about further deterioration?
For me? Oh, I thought you said. Well, we are investors in the neighborhood, and we certainly are going to continue to be investors in the neighborhood. The only thing, I'm not going to try and match these giants. The only thing I would say at the end here is that for myself and my company Chevron and my council, the U.S. Saudi Business Council, we're proud to have been a part of this discussion. The two things that I heard were Partnership for Peace, which I think is a wonderful concept that I could feel very strongly about. And the other one really is get to know each other better. I mean, I just don't think we know each other in terms of the public of our country and the public of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And getting to know each other better is critically important. There's no better way to get to know each other than through trade and investment. And we are part of that just by the nature of our business. The U.S. Saudi Business Council, obviously that's their role. But trade and investment, there's a flight of people moving to Saudi Arabia today to invest in Saudi Arabia. The opportunities to invest there are fantastic. So I think, I know you want me to stop, but I think there's getting to know each other, and the people getting together in public and talking about this issue is the only way forward.
Thank you so much, Peter. Minister, last word.
What I'm saying very simply, in today's world, it's people to people, civil society working with each other. Organizations work together in order to enhance the understanding. There's got to be more of a glue, and the glue can be provided through trade and investments. It'll be a mistake to think that trade and investment are not that important. The more people you have, there's a huge multiplier effect. As more Saudis here, we have 20,000 students now in the US. These are people who will understand the United States and will understand how to deal with it. Likewise, you'll have to understand how to deal with us, and it's done through outfits like Peter and Desmond Carr there. You know, you cannot impose exogenous values on any country without having a backlash developing that will create the animosity and the mistrust. In the last 8 years, that animosity and mistrust was very apparent. And it's going to take a long time to be able to unwind that misconception that we have went through. The idea that you could impose democracy, the idea, that was synonymous with let's have chaos so that we can continue to do what we want.
Well, thank you very much. Please give a round of applause to Senator Chuck Hagel, Prince Turki Al Faisal, Rita Hauser, in absentia, Zbigniew Brzezinski, Abdullah Ali Reza, and Peter Robertson. I want to thank our panel very much, and I want to encourage any moderator who comes after me, do not follow my example. We're going to now move very